So just kind of set the tone for folks. What we're doing here is we're going to be doing a series. So you'll see more of these. First Wednesday of each month, we'll be offering these lunch and learn sessions, different topics every time. If you don't know Vision New England well, our mission is to accelerate evangelism. And we do that by helping the church work in unity, the way Jesus prayed for, to make disciples, the primary mission of the church, and to do justice so that people see our good works and praise our Father in heaven, so that when we share Jesus with them, it's very effective. And we want, and that all of that takes money, as does all of what you all are doing. And so that we thought that was a good inaugural topic. We have with us Jamie Bush and Drake Richey, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. But the conversation we were having with them is that we assume that our folks who have financial advisors are talking with them about strategically how to do giving in the most effective way. And the reality is that most financial advisors are not necessarily having those kinds of conversations or don't stimulate them. And so there's money being left on the table, if you will. Some of you who know me know I'm a corporate guy, so I use more corporate terms than ministry terms. So you have to bear with me on that. But what we asked Jamie and Drake to do is equip us enough as ministry leaders to raise the issues with our folks in a way that they're then going to pursue it in their own financial advisors or whoever they work with to do that, in a way that the ministry gets more money without having to ask the person to write a bigger check. So it's all about strategies and how they do it, that we get more, the ministry gets more out of that same level of giving. And so we have Jamie and Drake with us. After they've got some stuff they're going to share, then afterwards we've got some time for questions and answers. And then for folks who want to stay around, we're going to break folks into breakout rooms where they can just unpack it on their own. We haven't assigned moderators or anything to those, so it'll just be a place where folks can kind of share what they heard, unpack it, and hear from other folks. And so that's our agenda. Let me introduce Jamie and Drake, who are both good friends of Vision New England and really the church at large. They do a lot of work with churches and with their own church even. So Jamie is the founder of Bush and Company, where he's for more than 4 decades, he's guided families, businesses, nonprofits through estate and financial planning with a holistic, client-focused approach. He's a registered investment advisor with designations in special needs planning, family businesses, retirement planning, and life insurance. Jamie brings professional expertise and deep commitment to service and the church. He and his wife, Sue, are active in their downtown Boston church. Drake Richey is a partner in Bush and Company, where he helps families and business owners navigate holistic, values-driven financial and estate planning. He's a certified exit planning advisor, and accredited investment fiduciary. Drake brings experience from Fitch Ratings as well as Wells Fargo, where he served as senior VP of commercial banking before joining Bush and Company in 2015. He and his wife, Sarah, live in Boston with their children. They're also active in their church and the community. And so with that, let me just thank Jamie and Drake in advance for their time and their expertise that they're going to share with us today and for all they do. And Jamie, Drake, all yours.
Wonderful. Well, so many words of who I am. And great to see some friendly faces, especially Matt Samuelson. Great to see you after a long, long time. I am just going to start by kind of reiterating a little bit of what the scope of what we're trying to do today. We are not trying to come in with a hard opinion of like how to raise money. In some ways, I feel like that's like a constantly changing thing about whether you're a church or a nonprofit. So people come at it from totally different ways, whether you're just thinking this past week about churches and wondering like how many churches still do pledge cards? Like, is that still the way that people raise money and get commitments? Like, we're not here to talk about that. Although I'll be curious to see in the Q&A if people have feedback, because that might be a helpful part of to fill out the conversation. What we are here to do today is we're here to talk a little bit about like the tools that people use with giving. The stats on 2024 giving are that 27% of people, individual giving came from donor advised funds. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. In some ways, it's like if you own a house or live in a house, like you should know how to fix the toilet. Like you don't have to be a plumber, but you should know a little bit about like, oh, how does it work? Like how does the money move? so that you can be a counselor if it comes to that, as well as just like knowing the tension associated with the financial products that our people use around giving. We'll talk a little bit about legacy planning and estate planning, which I think is just helpful to have a conversation around it. Again, how do people do it? How are people thinking about it, both from like within the range of income, and then what are some of the tensions associated with it? And then we'll allow plenty of time uh, for Q&A afterwards. And feel free, again, this is the whole point of this is that it's interactive and that there's lots of back and forth. We don't have a heavy slide deck. So if I might not even use any slides if I can, but I have a couple just in case it's helpful. But feel free to interact and ask questions. Do I have the ability, Bjorn, or Charles, do I have the ability to share a screen?
You do.
All right, I'm going to start with just to kind of lighten it up a little bit. I'm going to start with a giving video. This is really for Bjorn Anderson. A Mockingbird, this ministry that we support out of Virginia, a giving video from them, just to get us cooking. All right, is everybody ready? Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Videos are always questionable whether they work, but we'll give it a try.
You should see a dog.
We do.
Millions of guilty sinners hear bad news day after day. They have no one who hears them, no one to help them, no one to set them free. Will you be an angel for a mockingbird today? Please go to the website on your screen with a monthly gift right now. For just $10 a month or 30 cents a day, you'll help rescue millions of desperate people from anxiety, pride, despair, hopelessness. Join online in the next 24 hours, and for just 30 cents a day, you'll receive a welcome kit with a low anthropology sticker and a complimentary magazine. For $100 a month, price a cup of coffee a day. We'll send you an autographed headshot of David Zoll. You'll even make the I be dotted with a heart. Right now, there's a mockingbird who needs you. Your donation says, I'm here to help. Please give right now. Don't let the gospel light go out. Don't bury your talent in the ground. You serve God or mammon. Store up treasures in heaven. Give today.
Well, there you have it. To like start to lighten up the mood a little bit of a very funny video, like on a parody of so much giving that is done today, or so much kind of asks around giving. They're like, what's the trick? What are you like? How do you pull at the heartstrings, and get people to give more? And our goal today is in some ways is like the inverse of that, is that we're just trying to like talk pragmatically about how people give, and how people in our that we work with from a financial planning side, like how they oftentimes use financial tools to give. So with that, we're going to start talking about donor advised funds. And the donor advised fund, as I said before, is represents about 27% of giving in the US for individual donors. So I just want to talk about a little bit about how they work, and I'm sure that there's a large variability on people's experience with donor advised funds in this group. The biggest thing with the donor advised fund is that I'll share my screen one more time so we can look at it together. The donor advised fund, people are able to create their own 501c3. And so they create their own 501c3, which is called a donor advised fund. They can give to that and they get a certain level of deductions. The deductions are not as much as if they were to give cash to an actual charity, but they're capped at a certain level, but they get basically the same amount of deduction as if you were to give to a normal charity. The money then stays in that donor advised fund, and the donor can decide at any point when to gift that money to the actual charity. The words that they oftentimes use are you gift to the donor advised fund and you grant to a charity. There are a few different things that make donor advised funds interesting to people who want to give to charity and be thoughtful about it. One of the things is that it ends up simplifying things from a tax point of view. So if you give to 10 charities, but you give them all through the donor advised fund, you're only going to get one tax form. You're only going to get a tax receipt from the donor advised fund. People like it because the money goes in and then it can grow tax-free within there, which really gets to the heart of the donor advised fund, which you are able to separate the tax impact of a gift with it actual going to the when it actually goes to the charity. That's kind of the grand innovation of donor advised funds. Like the people oftentimes talk about that you're gifting appreciated stock, which people do, which has its own tax advantages. But you can gift appreciated stock to a charity straight out. You can gift appreciated stock to a church. The big innovation with the donor advised fund is that you've separated the tax from the gift. So if you want to recognize the tax impact of a gift in 2025, but you only want to give to a church or a charity in 2026, like if you want to give on a monthly basis through 2026, you can make the gift either cash or some sort of stock to the donor advised fund in December of 2025. You get the tax benefit in 2025, and then you can spread out that gift through 2026 or even, really forever. There's no limit on when the money has to be granted out.
So Drake, let me just ask a question, make sure I caught this. So anybody, you can go to a brokerage house, Charles Schwab or something like that, and you can open a donor advised account or fund that you can then fund money into. And so maybe I have a big windfall this year, and I can put it in there because I don't want to give it all this year. I want to give it over time, but I get the tax benefit of it this year. But then I think I heard you say, but whatever I put into that can grow tax-free, which goes back to our point about the church can get more, the ministry can get more, because it sounds like you're describing almost an IRA for charitable giving. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yes, that is a way to think about it.
Okay.
I mean, I think to just make sure that to not go into all the nuances of it, but to give a little bit more detail, you wouldn't. There are specific donor advised fund companies, so it's not just like Fidelity is the largest. So in that case, your example of any brokerage works. But there also are very specific smaller donor advised funds that anybody can open up a donor advised fund.
Okay. Just like opening up any kind of brokerage.
Correct. It's actually much easier than opening an investment account because you don't actually own the account. So the same kind of know your customer rules associated with opening an investment account or an IRA, they don't apply to a donor advised fund because you don't actually own the account. You're just the advisor. So it's not in your name. It's in the donor advised fund. It's in the brokerage house's name, basically.
So I get my charitable contribution when I put the money in the donor advised fund. Then over time, when I want it to go to my church or ministry or whatever it is, I tell them who I want them to send it to, and then they process it that year.
Correct. So like donor advised funds, people can just do it with like you can make a monthly cash contribution if you want to. Like let's say you wanted to put in, let's say your normal giving in a year is $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month. That's what your normal giving is. You can just put cash, $2,000 a month into the donor advised fund, spray that out to the charities that you want to. And so it all happens pretty quickly, almost similar to some people money comes into their bank account on their payday and then they quickly shift it to 4 other accounts. It's like, oh, my vacation account, my savings account, my stocking, whatever. They like spray it out. You can kind of do that same thing with a donor advised fund. Or if you say, oh, I want to make a big contribution, either it's a stock that you want to gift because it has big gains, or somebody just got paid a big bonus and they don't want to give it all to the charity at once. They want to spread it out over time. They might say, oh, I got a big bonus. Why don't I put $50,000, just like making up numbers, I'm going to put $50,000 in the donor advised fund, and then I'm going to plan on giving that out over the next however many years. People also do it with selling a business.
Sorry, but just to be clear, but if I put that $50,000 in, or 10, or 5, that whatever the number is, I leave it there for time. Now it's worth 7,000. I still only put $5,000 into it, but I got to give away 7. Right?
Because it grew. Is that what you're saying? Because it grew.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a benefit. The real benefit, though, from a donor advised fund is that you're skipping out on the capital gains of that stock that you gifted.
Yep. So I don't pay tax on it, and it grew.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah. Nice.
I mean, let me just make one sort of summary comment for today on donor advised funds, which are commonly known as DAFs among people who have them. There are a lot of appreciated assets out there today: real estate, stocks, businesses. And for someone who's going to sell their house for $5 million with a $300,000 basis, or sell their business, they might say, I'm going to put $1 million in my donor advised fund, which will offset the capital gains tax on the rest of the money, and will reduce my overall tax burden. And I'll put $1 million in this fund, which I can give from for as long as there's money there. I can grow it, or more importantly, I can give it, and I can start giving it right away, but I don't have to give it. So it's a great way to cut capital gains tax on significantly appreciated assets and start a fund at the same time, which I can give from, and I may be able to, I can easily include my family and others, and we'll get into that in a few minutes.
I think a lot of us, Jamie, want to know, who are these people selling their house for $5 million, because we want in on that.
Well, in this call, we're talking about people who are typically fairly high net worth, because most of our clients who we're giving this sort of advice to are very high net worth. It's not because we don't like people who are low net worth. We all have the same value in God's eyes. But it's important, I think, for a lot of people who are in a position to talk about money and giving with their high net worth congregants, clients, whatever they are, donors, to talk about it, because it's a subject that makes a lot of very high net worth people uncomfortable. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Drake, do you want to?
Sorry, Jamie, just to be clear, so I get the targeting there, but there's nothing we're talking about that doesn't also work in a church or a ministry that's dealing with somebody who might be not of such significant means, right?
So far, donor advised funds are good for anyone who has any sort of appreciated assets, and for a lot of other reasons. And one other thing is that I can give anonymously by putting money in my donor advised fund and naming it something like the Christ on Earth Fund or whatever. So there are lots of benefits to donor advised funds for lots of people.
Nice, thanks.
Charles, generally the minimum on a donor advised fund is $5,000 to get it going.
Okay, thanks.
Just as a point of reference, like the for them to make work from a fee standpoint, like some of the, generally, like that's generally the good rule of thumb. And again, people can do it with cash. They don't have to do it with a stock. Like stocks are as a better asset to contribute from a tax point of view, but people do it all the time with cash. But if somebody's giving greater than $5,000 a year, then a donor advised fund can work for them.
Gotcha. Thanks, Drake.
I think it's helpful in this to talk just about some of the tensions associated with this product and kind of bring it into the light, and then it's a helpful conversation to have. I do think one of the tensions with donor advised funds is in this kind of middle center like how much is staying in there versus how much is giving away. There have been critiques of donor advised funds that they've become like an unsupervised, unregulated private foundation. Private foundations, you're required to give 5% per year from the private foundation. There's no such requirement in the donor advised fund. Donor advised fund, they generally, I'll just give you the statistic. The about 25% of money in donor advised funds is given away every year. So that's the average draw rate. There's around $250 billion in donor advised funds, and around 50 is given away every year. So again, some people, it comes in, it goes out, like 100%. I'm like that. It's like it comes in, it goes out, boom, boom, like very fast. And then other people make contributions and they just are so slow at getting the money out. And so I think as Christians, like that's a helpful conversation. That's a tension to be had. Like, all right, the money is going into the donor advised fund, but like, what are you doing? Like, what are you waiting for? And I get it. Some people have a very clear goal in mind with their giving. Like, I've known people who've used donor advised funds to basically sock away huge amounts of money because they want to start a school in India, or a college or something like that, like huge, like million or tens of millions or $100 million projects that this is the way for them to build up that money in the most efficient way.
Drake, is there a scenario where I could put in, let's say I get a $10,000 windfall, I sold my house and I want to set it aside or whatever it is. Could I put that there and then just give away each year the appreciation, whatever it's increased by, and I can leave that core amount there? So I'm not giving of not my money at the end of the day.
Correct.
Right. Nice. Okay.
So that's the tension. Like that's the tension of like how people put money in it, and then people have this, like, people like to control. They like money under their roof, and if the money is in the donor advised fund, it has been given away, but it hasn't really reached the end charity. And so I just think that as leaders, it's good to be I think people in general are aware of that sense in people, right? Like people don't like to give money away, or the majority of people. Like generosity can be a fleeting emotion, and so it can happen with donor advised fund that people think that they've given the money away because they've gotten the tax write-off, but then it just sits in the donor advised fund versus like go give the money away, basically, like spend it, basically, like go use it for kingdom purposes, get rid of it. And I think generally Christians are better than that than non-Christians. But it's just it's a tension to be aware
of. So going back to our theme, what I'm hearing you saying is another thing we need to be thinking about is when we're talking to our people, they've already given this money. They've already gotten a tax benefit for it. It's just sitting there. So as we talk to them about fundraising, we can be talking about whether, we have to think about strategically about how to have the conversation, but we can be talking about them having donor money sitting in a donor advised fund that they just haven't gotten around to donating to anyone yet.
That's right. Like it's very common somebody sells a business. I'm thinking of somebody sold his business for 10 million bucks, but 2 million put 20% into the donor advised fund before it's sold. So then after the sale of the business, there's around 2 million bucks, and he'll give that away over 10 or 15 years. Which I think is prudent. I don't really have any judgment of that, but it is an awareness of like, oh, like there's money in the donor advised fund, almost like a private foundation, but it's a much more accessible and low cost tool than a private foundation.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Any other questions?
A quick answer to Patty. The recipients of grants from a donor advised fund do have to be a 501c3. And once you
or a church.
Or a church. It has to be a nonprofit. And once you put the money in a donor advised fund, it's there and you no longer have any direct control over it. So I set up a donor advised fund at the National Christian Foundation, and I direct, which is really a request to NCF, that they make a gift to my church in Dorchester or Vision New England. Let me just, I'm going to segue a little bit to what to me is a much more complex issue, which is that, for instance, I mentioned a church in Dorchester. We have a client who's a good friend who goes to a church in Dorchester, and he and his wife are probably by far the largest givers to that church. It's not a well-heeled church, but they love their church, and they are really confused by their money. They have, in their eyes, too much money. Some of it inherited, some of it doesn't really matter, but they didn't. They're just confused by their money, and I use them as an example because it's true of so many people who have a lot of assets, whether they inherited it, made it, sold their company. It shapes their identity, and we can help them by just actually offering, and they, because there are often our largest donors, we think they're all set. And the last thing we want to do is have a conversation with them about money because it makes us uncomfortable. And so, but what can we do for them? And one thing we can do for them is just say, how about lunch? And not lunch where at the end of the lunch, predictably, we say, well, have you thought about how much you're going to give to whatever this year? But how are you doing? How's your family doing? And getting to know them at a deeper level, and maybe having lunch again at some point and asking them questions. How do you feel about your giving? Are there, you give us a lot. Are there things that you'd like to see us be doing differently? Don't talk about music. I'm glad to see a couple of smiles because that was a joke. Because it's just such a third rail for churches and it's hard. But they don't feel safe with lots and lots of people, and it's because of the money. So then it's also helpful if we're even slightly knowledgeable about ways to help them in a number of ways. Some of them charitable tools, some of them things like to help them with their family, their values assessments, their communications tests, their families assessments, an assessment of how my family's doing, which everyone in my family would be involved in. And those are the things that matter most to them. And helping somebody think about the idea of a family mission statement. Because if somebody has a family mission statement and they put the time into doing that, it's going to help them focus on where they should be giving. And it may be an opportunity for them to bring in their children or grandchildren into helping them think about that, not because they feel they need help, but because it's good for my family if we're doing this together. And it also gives me a sense, when I go down this road, it gives me a sense of how capable my children might be or grandchildren of handling a lot of money. Because at some point, I'm going to die. I come out of an insurance background. We have a lot of data on that, if you have any questions. And even really rich people die. And they are concerned about where to leave their money because do I think my kids can handle $10 million? Do I think, so then I think, oh, you know what, none of my kids can handle this much money, so I'm just going to give it all to charity. I'll give it all to the church. But somebody had an analogy for that, which is a little bit like putting a refrigerator in a canoe. Do I think my church or do I think my favorite nonprofit can handle $10 million? So giving together as a family, just exploratorily, new word, could be using our donor advised fund together. Saying we're going to do this at Thanksgiving and then we're going to do it quarterly or whatever. People can come to their own conclusions on that. It doesn't mean that they're going to tell their family what they're worth, which is sometimes their greatest fear. But it is a connection with their family around the money that often hasn't been made. Another thing, and Drake's touched on this a couple of times, giving now while we're alive. We have another client, well, he's dead, died about 10 years ago, but after he became a Christian, he was very involved in the Catholic Church. He was very involved in politics. But then he became a Christian and he stopped giving to all the things that he was giving to before and started giving to a lot of human services, and actually had a huge impact on the way the World Health Organization treats healthcare for the poor. His goal became to give everything he could away in this lifetime, and ended up giving about $150 million away, and leaving nothing, which was his goal. He did have a $7 million or $5 million life insurance policy that he left in a trust for his 7 children. But he felt he had already taken care of all of his kids' education needs, helped them with housing. They didn't need more money, but the world did. And when he had that transformation, which came out of his coming to faith, it changed millions of lives. And it changed his family's life, though a couple resented him for giving away their inheritance. But you can't bat 1,000, even with family, especially with family. Anyway, so I'll just take a breath. Go ahead, Charles.
No, I was just going to ask, so how many more, I want to make sure we leave enough time for everything. How many more vehicles, investment vehicles or points do you guys want to make? So wondering if we should pause for more questions or jump through some of those before we do.
I think donor advised fund is the primary one that we want to talk about. We don't want to get too deep in the weeds on other complex ones. The only other thing that I thought would be worthwhile to flag on the donor advised fund, and then I think it would be helpful to open it up for questions, is that there are lots of them. And so being a little bit aware of the tension associated with like having a Christian donor advised fund versus a secular one. The most used donor advised fund is Fidelity. And there are very few guardrails associated with giving from a Fidelity donor advised fund at this point, versus the Christian one. The Christian, like the National Christian Foundation, is probably the biggest Christian donor advised fund, and they will block gifts to charities that are antithetical to the gospel. Christians have expressed concern around Fidelity that at some point Fidelity might block gifts that are being made from a Fidelity donor advised fund if it falls on some list. So like if it's a pro-life organization, for example. So that's a little bit more of like, you don't need to know a plumber, but you need to know like how the toilet works and like how the water flows through. It's like, oh, like there are a lot of donor advised funds, and I can't imagine I can imagine, I guess, in some instances where you're being asked, like, which one should I open one as I go? I can't imagine that's like your primary role of advice and counseling around giving, but just that is a tension of, oh, where do I do it? And Christian ones are generally a little bit more expensive because the money comes in and goes out faster than Fidelity, where it goes and it stays there for a long time.
I'll just say that I think it's worth getting to know donor advised funds, and everybody on this call is younger than I am, and so would naturally go to Google or ChatGPT or someone to learn about it. But going to the National Christian Foundation, since most of us at least are Christians on this call, isn't a bad idea. You can go to their website, and you can call Michael O'Neill, who's in charge of New England, and ask him who can help you understand donor advised funds for your purposes. And it isn't going to take long because it's really simple. It's even more simple than we've made it today. I'll mention one more thing, not because you want to know everything about charitable remainder trusts, but because I think it's indicative of the fact that people have a lot of flexibility with charitable tools. The charitable remainder trust is probably more talked about than many of these and least used, but it's a door opener. So we have a client, for instance, who's selling a business for his part of it is $40 million. He's going to put 20% in a in a charitable remainder trust. It'll be in there for a long time. He gets a very significant deduction. Again, that deduction will help offset the impact of capital gains on the rest of the company that he sells. But he also can take an income from it. So if I'm taking 5% income from the $8 million that I put in this charitable trust, and I can take $400,000 a year for the term of the trust, that's interesting. Why wouldn't I want to know more about that before I sell my company? So again, it's not, you don't want to know everything about it. You just want to know, it's like Drake said, the oft used, maybe too oft used example of the toilet with respect to money. You want to know a really good plumber. And you all know people who can advise on these things. And there are a number of people on the call, like Bob Grinnell, who know more about it than I do because it's been his whole life. But there are plenty of people who you can turn to for advice. Let's go to Q&A.
Okay, thanks. And so raise your hand if you have a question, and or you can just submit it in a text like Patty did.
Not all at once.
Yeah, I always get told I don't leave enough time for people to actually ask questions, so I'm just not saying anything.
I'll jump in with a question here.
Thanks,
And I
Greg.
was wondering, as we said, the term is donor advised fund, and you hinted at this a little bit with National Christian versus Fidelity. Is there any concern long term about how much control the donor retains over the funds? Because it's the way you're talking about it, on the one hand, it sounds like, well, you just tell them exactly which charity and how much to grant and when to grant it. But that word advised makes me think that ultimately, well, as you said, we don't have ownership of it. So is there concerns about that lack of ownership and sort of control long term?
Yes. Yeah, like it's yes is the short answer. Like we haven't seen it play out. But what's that organization, like the Southern Poverty Law? Is that the name?
Yeah.
Who like comes up with a list every year, and they know, like we know they go to Fidelity's charitable trust people every year and are like, block all these gifts, and like try to get them to block them. They do block stuff. I mean, like you're gonna get if somebody tried to give money to a neo-Nazi organization, like it's gonna get blocked because Fidelity ends up having to report it on their 990, I think. Like in the same way that any of these charitable trusts, like the big overarching entity, whether it's Fidelity or National Christian Foundation, they have to report it. So if you're giving to a neo-Nazi organization, they're going to shut it down. So there is long-term concern that that they could start blocking Christian things, whatever, if the political environment was such. You can, let me kind of go back to the other side. The National Christian Foundation, if you try to make a gift to a non-Christian antithetical to the gospel organization, they would deny it, but they would say, hey, you could, if you want to, make a gift to another donor advised fund that you set up, and you could do it that way. And so there are ways to work around it for these organizations who say that who are going to deny something, but want to allow the donor to have some level of control. But who's to say that keeps happening? Like, who's to say that, like, Fidelity would do that down the road. If you said, I want to give to this pro-life organization, they said, no, that's on our list. And then you said, all right, fine, I'm transferring it to another donor advised fund. They could block it. Like, it's not your money. You're just an advisor on it. Let me
Yeah.
keep going. Let me just hit Matt Samuelson's question, which is a good
Well,
one. Oh, go ahead.
Let me just close out on that one, Greg, because I've asked the same question to Drake and Jamie a number of times. And certainly National Christian Foundation is safer, but the day that Fidelity stops allowing people to use those funds to give to churches and Christian organizations is the day Fidelity drives up that revenue stream because people won't give to them anymore. So they care about that. So there's a little bit of a pressure there, but National Christian is safer. And let me just say, Drake, before we go on to Matt's question, I just want to point out, Pastor Philomena put in the chat that she's already talked to people about this, and she's gotten people giving out of their donor advised fund to her church. So that's worth knowing about. That's a good testimony. Thanks, Pastor Philomena. But go ahead. So Matt's question in the chat is, what happens when people who make a donor advised fund contribution die without having designated where they want that to go?
So if you are encouraged to fill out like who's the successor advisor when you contribute to when you set up a donor advised fund. So if it's a tricky question to know what happens if it dies, somebody dies and there's no successor. I think in general it's going to be given away according to whatever Fidelity or National Christian or whatever they will have rules around that about what happens if there's no successor. I would say we've had a lot of conversations actually recently with National Christian that have been pretty interesting. That they have very clear guidelines about what happens whether or not there's a successor. And I think one of the interesting reasons to use a Christian donor advised fund is that they will protect donor intent from drift, from kind of values and vision drift of the next generation. So I think that actually the death question is a big reason to choose one of these Christian donor advised funds, because they will act in a fiduciary or steward capacity to protect the grantor's wishes.
It's actually worth, when the grantor is making the gift to National Christian Foundation or World Vision or whoever's donor advised fund they're using, it's worth giving a lot of thought to that. And one of the things that the folks at National Christian suggested last week when we talked to them is around this question is just what Drake's talking about. You might say, for 10 years after I die, I want the money to go to this organization or these organizations. But in 10 years, I want whoever the donor advised fund is to do an evaluation of how they're doing. And I would like them, if one of the 4 organizations that the money's been going to for the last 10 years isn't cutting it, or they've mission drift or whatever it is, then the donor advised fund has the right to give their money to some other organization in that field who they've done the research on. And now they're going to get the money. And that could be every 10 years, it could be 20 years. It could be a field of interest or designated funds. And the successor could be my children. Collectively, it could be anybody. But those are questions that are really worth asking when they're making this gift. So, by the way, somebody else asked if $5,000 is actually the minimum contribution. It isn't necessarily the minimum. It is often the minimum for a donor advised fund.
So whoever's managing the fund, if it's Fidelity, they've got a minimum threshold. National Christian Foundation has one, and you may find different entities have different minimum contributions. Is that right, Jamie?
Yes.
Okay.
And there are, by the way, we know people who have given to community foundations, like even the Boston Foundation. And there's a reason why I say that. But because they want to influence that community foundation, could be the North Shore Community Foundation, South Shore Metro West, or Boston Foundation. Our client gave $20 million to the Boston Foundation, which has taken a sharp left turn ideologically in the last few years, which a lot of people who are believers would really disagree with. But he wants to influence. He's now one of their 10 largest donors. And so he will have an impact. I'm not sure it's a good idea, but he will have an impact on what they're seeing from a giving perspective, because giving to pro-life organizations, which actually they challenged him on, and he challenged them back. So you can do a lot with money, especially charitable money. And then there's the problem, never mind, it's too philosophical. And there's the control problem. Does Jesus want us to have endowments? Ask him.
Well, let's there's another question here, so let's go to that one. So David Huntley is asking, at some donor advised funds, you can choose the type of investments you want made with the funds, equities, mutual funds. How does the National Christian Foundation manage the funds you donate? And I would just tack onto that, and is there a fee for it?
So usually at the lower levels of investments, each donor advised fund has an option, almost like you would have in a retirement account. It's like, do you want to be aggressive or moderate or conservative? Like they'll have 5 different options that you can just select, which generally people select it based on how fast they think the money is going out the door. At bigger dollar amounts, you can have your own investment advisor manage the money. They'll allow that. So, but that usually is like $250,000 and up.
Okay, thanks. And then Allie Curry at Young Life is asking, is there an incentive for donors to give from their donor advised funds yearly at any point? I think she's thinking about, for normally the tax giving, we want to do our giving by year end. Is there something like that? Or the perk that is that donors can hold the money in general? Wondering how to do a specific ask from a donor advised fund givers and whether there's any incentive for them to give in a timely manner.
A really good question. I mean, part of the that is part of the challenge actually with donor advised fund is like sometimes we try to create urgency by saying like, oh, are you going to give by year end to get the tax benefit? But the money in the donor advised fund has already crossed that tax threshold, so there isn't the same urgency to get rid of it. It's just money that the giver has already set aside for giving. And so it should just be much more of a conversation around like here are the needs of the ministry. Give that way. I also, Al, your like one other question was like, are donor advised funds public information like a private foundation? And they're not. Like that's one of the big, like from a donor point of view, that's one of the big advantages of a donor advised fund. Like nobody knows how much money is in my donor advised fund or anybody's. Nobody, like that is not public information. And it's very easy to give anonymously through a donor advised fund too. Like it's very easy to kind of hide who's where it's going. Because it just showed, like you can have it just show up that it looks like Fidelity's giving it.
So if I give Drake directly to a charity, I can say I want it to be anonymous, but they know I gave it to them. If I give through a donor advised fund, it just shows up with Fidelity's name on it, and there may not be. If I don't want, there's no reference to me, and they don't know I gave it.
Correct.
And it can be hard to track it. Like you might get the donor may inadvertently actually make it anonymous when they don't really mean to. Like Jamie mentioned, like sometimes people like to name their donor advised funds like I don't know. So they give it all sorts of different names.
Yeah.
Like the Kingdom Praise Fund, and you get a gift from the Kingdom Praise Fund, and you're like, who is this? Yeah. Like, and it can, if the donor doesn't kind of click the right button, you'll never know.
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things to kind of be aware of, and it's just another question to be asking, like, oh, how do you do it? Like, how do you plan your giving? Like, do does all your giving come out of the donor advised fund? How do you like just a spirit of curiosity around it? So that right you I mean essentially like the next level of thoughtful development. Like if we were if we thought, oh, who are the best people at doing development? It's probably Harvard. Like where are the highest paid development officers in the country? It's probably Harvard. Like um they're not just asking the giver where the money they're not just suggesting like, hey, give it to this building project, but they're also trying to be thoughtful about where the money is coming from. They don't need to know everything, but the more they have an idea of like where is the money coming from, the better they can craft the ask. Right? They're like, oh, you have a private foundation. Great. You have to give away 5% every year. Great. Like I know that I can ask for a recurring gift because you're gonna have to spit out money from this private foundation every year, like you have to. Or like I don't know, you're a hedge fund guy. You have highly appreciated stocks. Like you got to give from somewhere. The more that you have, that's just essentially like the next level of giving. That sometimes the door opens, sometimes it doesn't. But the donor advised fund is an easy place to start, especially if they've made it clear that if you can see on your tax form, on the giving forms, that that's where it's coming from.
I want to go back to Ali Curry's question. At the end of it, is there an incentive for them to give in a timely manner? No financial incentive, but a kingdom incentive. And I think I want to go back to the idea that a lot of people who have a lot of money in donor advised funds or that they haven't given yet are confused by their money. It has a huge impact on their identity, as I said earlier. And I think when you have that lunch with any of these people, one question you might say is, I'm just curious, what are you trying to accomplish with your money? What's the purpose of your money? And shut up, because it's just a legitimate question, which no one has probably asked them before. Rockland, you asked if I mentioned the name of the person who gave it all away, and even though he's dead, I didn't. Call me and I'll tell you. But it reminds me that we almost set up a donor advised fund and called it the Jamie and Sue Bush Anonymous Fund, just because we wanted a little bit of credit. And Bob, your question about it feels like a trick question. Can you use donor advised fund grants to fund pledges? I think you probably know the answer to that. And I don't remember, but I have a bad feeling that you cannot. But it may vary from one DAF to another.
Meaning, just to clarify, and then Bob, maybe you can come off mute if just we know we're answering your question. So you're asking, so I make a pledge to Gordon College to give $5,000 next year. Can I then go to my donor advised fund and say, now make that $5,000 contribution to satisfy my pledge? Is that the question you're asking? I can see you nodding, so that's good. And so go ahead.
That's exactly. I just didn't want folks to get tricked by that, because it is something that often they will ask you as a charity. They will call and they will say, we have a $10,000 gift here that's going to Gordon College. And the question they will ask, is this funding any particular pledge that the donor has made? And if you say yes, then they will not honor that. So that's a big concern and a red flag that you need to be aware of. So again, if somebody says, hey, I'm going to make this through my donor advised fund, you may have asked for help with a particular project or something, but you want to say, well, you know what, make that gift to us. We'll end up getting it there, but make that gift to us unrestricted.
Yeah, so that's a great nuance, Bob. Thanks for bringing that up. So the idea is that a donor has, when they make the contribution to donor advised funds for tax purposes, they have to lose control of the money, which is why they then, when they want it distributed, they nominate your ministry to get it. And if they use it to satisfy a pledge, the argument is they're not then losing control of that money. And so the IRS won't allow them to make a charitable contribution with it. So that's a good point. So if you're talking to somebody and you're asking for, if you're trying to have a conversation about pledges and donor advised funds money, you need to think strategically about how you want to have the conversation. Great point. Thanks, Bob.
I want to throw one more thing out. And we have 2 minutes. I'll try and do it in one. We work with a wonderful philanthropic consultant, and he is working with a Jewish organization. I think it's the Jewish Community Foundation in Dallas, and asked one of their largest donors, "How important is Israel to you?" And he said, "Oh, it's everything." And he said, "How does your estate plan reflect that?" And I mention it because it's a great question, and because we haven't talked about bequests, but to not talk about bequests, especially for churches, could be a huge mistake. And some people just want to have that conversation. And you could say, if you have that conversation, by the way, what are some things that you would like to see us do differently? I sort of alluded to this at the beginning. Again, apart from music, would you, for instance, would you like us to see more money going to any particular thing that we do? Would you like us to be giving money away to outside organizations outside the church because you'd like to do that through us? Would you like us to be any number, make it up? I think the more we engage people with just questions about life and their mission and their vision and the purpose of their money, but after we are engaging them on the purpose of their life, we're doing something for them.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks, Drake, for sharing all of your expertise. And so, in just a moment, we've got some groups who've asked to stay on, and so we're going to put them in breakout rooms where they can unpack together, do a little crowdsourcing of what did you hear, what resonated, what didn't, maybe what wasn't clear, and maybe folks can help each other clarify. Come back to us if not. And so Ashley will be doing that. We understand some folks will have to drop or don't want to do that, and that's fine too. So don't feel shy about that. But I'm just going through my own takeaways on this. And so I think I see opportunities to bring in donor advised fund literature or something to educate our people about how donor advised funds work. That they could be giving out of the proceeds of a donor advised fund, that they can be getting the tax benefit in 1 year, and not having to worry about trying to capture that in a future year. That they can, we can be talking to people about unused donor advised funds, being careful to Bob Grinnell's point about not satisfying pledges. We can talk about our own financial planning or raise this topic to people in a way that gets them to raise it with their financial planner if they have one, so that they start having the conversation, because their financial planner is less likely to be bringing up to them the kinds of things Jamie just talked about, for example, is how does your money line up to your priorities in your estate planning or even in your giving today? And so those are my takeaways.
Charles?
Yep.
Sorry, I think we have a slide somewhere that is a list of 4, 5, 6 books that, we have an endless list of books that are great on this, depending on how much you want to know about it. But most of the books that are on the list are great around helping people with the benefits of generosity for themselves. One of them was written by an estate planning attorney in Utah, maybe the only estate planning attorney with 5 kids in Salt Lake City who's not a Mormon, but he writes about stewardship versus ownership. And it is a great book for anyone on this call to read to help you have this conversation. Anyway, they're all really interesting. The first one, Give Smart, is a very high level, but for people like our friend in Dorchester who's confused by his money, it's really helpful for them.
Okay.
Anyway, they're all interesting. They're all good. I didn't write any of them.
Okay, thanks. And we can find a place to post that stuff. Maybe Ashley, if we can get that list to Ashley, she can send it out in a survey to folks just so we get your feedback, and then we'll equip you with that stuff if it's helpful. Thanks again, Drake. Thanks again, Jamie. Thanks, and thanks, Ashley.